So the children's, the 60s scoop was a time during the decade of the 60s, but actually extended into the 70s and 80s, where there was really a concerted effort to separate Indigenous children from their communities, much like through residential schools. But this was, I think, even a more concerted effort. Children were taken from their families, from their parents, primarily for the reason of poverty. People made decisions about whether or not Indigenous parents could be good parents or not good parents, oftentimes made the choice that they couldn't be, and oftentimes related to poverty. And those children were adopted out across Canada, across North America, even across the world, primarily to non-Indigenous families. And this was a massive effort to really separate Indigenous children from their families. This was part of a continuing cultural genocide or genocide with respect to our communities.
We had lost many children, both provincially and even internationally, to adoptions. And I don't know where I heard it or read it, but somewhere it was said that a nation is nothing without its children, and we certainly have experienced that. So yes, the impact on First Nations has been devastating. They've lost generations of children. They've lost those family and community structures, how to parent, and we're all in the process of rebuilding that. It's been huge.
I run the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies, which is an organization that is a membership organization for almost all of the children's aid societies in Ontario. The Child and Family Services Act actually is over 30 years old, and that's when we should have started our journey for sure, because the Act definitely talks about the rights of Indigenous people and would have children's aid societies pay much more attention to ensuring that Indigenous children were being better cared for. But probably for many of us, it didn't start 30 years ago. I was a caseworker 30 years ago, and very little attention was paid to those parts of the Act back then. But I think probably about 10 or 15 years ago, certainly we were hearing lots more from Indigenous leadership, from Aboriginal organizations, First Nation, Inuit, Métis organizations and communities, First Nation communities, about the needs of their children, and really beginning to hear then about the impact of residential schools and the 60s scoop. So as a result of that, relationships started to be developed with First Nations within the communities, also relationships being developed with Indigenous service providers and communities, with a recognition that the services that had been provided were actually not helpful and in many cases harmful to the children. I've been talking extensively with First Nation, Métis and Inuit people for the last 10 years about the need for child welfare to significantly change the way that it does its business. And part of that conversation has been with the notion that the non-Indigenous child welfare system needs to publicly acknowledge and apologize for the role that they have played in the lives of Indigenous children and families. I have to say that it is probably one of the most emotionally difficult things that I've had to be thinking about for and I've been in child welfare for over 30 years. I began as a caseworker, and I apprehended several Indigenous children. I was an executive director where I had to have Indigenous people really yell at me to get me to realize the practices that we were keeping and the impact that they were having. I was not as supportive to Indigenous staff as I should have been, and I realize now how difficult it was for them to do child welfare work. I was not also as supportive as I should have been to the Indigenous agencies that were working towards the mandate for child welfare. So I've had to do a lot of thinking about the role that I personally have played. So on the one hand, I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to make this apology, because I really do want to, and I believe I need to. On the other hand, it's also been a very difficult, challenging, but necessary and worthwhile process.
I believe an apology is necessary. And in terms of why, I think we can't just go from a really tragic past to trying to change a future without acknowledging that some really horrible things have been done in the past and some really horrible things are being done now. And we need to be able to have a place in this journey that just stops for a moment and acknowledges bad things have happened, to apologize. Apology is part of a healing journey for everybody, for those that are part of the system and those that have been impacted by the system. So an apology, to me, is like, it's a starting point. The true test of an apology is, what do you do? How do you do things differently? How do you manifest those words in terms of your actions? But I think an apology is definitely required.
I think we're on the way. I think we're still in very initial stages. There's so much deeply ingrained colonization and oppression in both of us that until we get to the deeper roots of it, it's going to continue to be the surface, nice conversation.
Do we allow somebody to cut our young people down in such a way that says they're not Anishinaabe anymore, they're not of their heritage anymore? Is that taken from them? Do we, as people, protect our children who are going into care? And I was reminded a while ago to stop using that word, because it's not care.
So as I tell this story, I will just ask you to reflect on your own stories and your own histories, because I believe that all of us, we all create a collective story together. And I'm happy that we can be here in a place where we can be together and to walk forward.
Today, I'm here to apologize on behalf of the non-Indigenous Child Welfare Children's Aid Societies in Ontario for our role in the 60s scoop and our continued role in the present-day overrepresentation of Indigenous children within the child welfare system. We need to acknowledge that as Children's Aid Societies, we were aware of, or should have been aware of, the damage and trauma created first by residential schools, then carried forward by our participation in the 60s scoop. We saw the broken and devastated communities and were complacent in the belief that the fault was all yours. It was not. The actions we participated in clearly led you to this point. We apologize to the children, the mothers, and the fathers who have been hurt by the 60s scoop and who found themselves caught up in the child welfare system. The 60s scoop saw child welfare agencies remove thousands of Indigenous children from their homes, families, and communities across Canada. Many of these children were placed in non-Indigenous homes across Canada, the United States, and even overseas. While some adoptive families did their best to love and care for the Indigenous children, the 60s scoop is now recognized as a practice of forced assimilation and one that extended well beyond the 1960s and into the 1980s. Justice Edwin Kimmelman, the author of the 1985 report, No Quiet Place, on the child welfare system and how it affected Indigenous people, described the practice of the 60s scoop as cultural genocide. This is the same description used by Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin and Commissioner Murray Sinclair to describe the residential school system. While we are working to change the trajectory, we must recognize that today things are worse. Indigenous children continue to be overrepresented in our system. They continue to be placed in homes and institutions far from their families and communities. And often, still in 2017, these placements are not culturally safe. The children tell us that in their words and in their actions of suicide and self-harm. We have not adequately addressed the need for healing from trauma that is so necessary for Indigenous communities to move forward. We do not have the proper distribution of resources such that Indigenous organizations are providing the child welfare services to their children, and such that treatment opportunities are readily available so that healing can happen closer to home. It is important that we acknowledge and appreciate the impact and meaning of cultural genocide to the Indigenous people of Ontario. The 60s Scoop has been a continuation of that intergenerational trauma and cultural loss for Indigenous peoples of Ontario. There continues to be a lack of Indigenous culturally based services, and there continues to be resistance to the Indigenous self-determination with the respect to the care of children and families. These are the current and historic injustices that we, particularly the non-Indigenous Children's Aid Societies, need to take responsibility for. These are difficult truths, but it's a truth that we must speak and to begin the journey towards healing, change, and reconciliation. We cannot go backwards. Today marks the day of moving forward. It's a time to do more than offer words, and I must admit that in reading these words this morning, they do feel very, they're just words. But we're here to commit that we will seek and implement your guidance as we undertake active measures to ensure that we are serving Indigenous children and their families in a manner that empowers the children, the families, and communities. On July 6, 2017, the Ontario child welfare sector unanimously agreed to prioritize reconciliation with Indigenous communities through 8 key commitments. Those commitments are in a document that is in the package that you received, but to read those out to you. We have committed to reduce the number of Indigenous children in care, reduce the number of legal files involving Indigenous children and families, and increase the use of formal customary care agreements. We also have committed to ensure that Indigenous representation and involvement is in place at all local boards of directors. And we have agreed to implement mandatory, regular Indigenous training for all staff in Children's Aid Societies so they know the legacy of residential schools, the 60s Scoop, and the impact that we're having today. We have committed to change the interagency protocol to include Jordan's principle as a fundamental principle. And what we mean by that is we do have a protocol of how Children's Aid Societies work with each other and share cases back and forth. And we are going to embed Jordan's principle, or the principle that we take care of the child first and sort out who pays and who has jurisdiction after the child has been cared for. In consultation with Indigenous communities, we are committed to develop a unique agency-based plan to better address the needs of children and families in those communities. So today we're here as a province, but every community, every Children's Aid Society has committed to do this kind of work on a local basis with local First Nations, and if First Nations aren't within the local community, with the local Indigenous community, whatever that looks like in the local areas. The commitment is there to develop relationships between the local agency and the Indigenous community. We have committed to measure and track each of these commitments, and we have actually begun that. We have gathered information from all of the agencies. We just had that information come in 2 days before today, so we don't have it to share, but we are committed to sharing that information with you and to continue to track it over time. We are committed to do better. The OICAS and the agencies here today are committed to working with all of the stakeholders to ensure we find a healthier future for the children and families and communities. Thank you.
We teach our children to speak from their hearts. We teach our children to be able to know the difference between speaking from here and speaking from here. Because as Anishinaabe people, we know that we are whole, we are made whole, and that we have to be able to take care of those 4 components of who we are as Anishinaabe. Now we're here, and we're hearing an apology. More pain that we had to endure before we could hear this apology. But I want to ask all you Anishinaabe people, I want to ask you before you leave here to go and put that tobacco in the fire and pray that this knowledge that has been shared in this little while is it coming from here? Let's hope it's coming from the heart.
I'm a Grand Chief. That's different from any other tribal councils in the province or in Canada. I get elected by the people. I am the voice of the people. I'm standing here with a lot of emotion, with a heavy heart. Hearing the words that were expressed in regards to the treatment of our children and our families for many, many years. Children that were stealing, that were stole from my families back home. I don't call it care. I call it a legislated process of stealing children. The impacts are felt in my communities. There are suicides in my communities because of the impacts of residential school and also the CAS process legislation. It's a good intention. But how do I apologize, or how do you apologize to a parent who saw their kid leave on a plane and come back in a gasket? How do you apologize to that? How do you say I'm sorry to the parent who cannot see their child become a hunter, become a parent, become a father or a mother? How do you apologize to that? That's the impact of the system that we're talking about here. You look at the apology of the residential school. What's happening right now? They're still in the courts withholding information about individuals through the IAP process. Is that a sincere apology? And like I said, I am angry. I'm not angry at the individuals that are sitting here. I'm angry at the system that made them do it. Ishchimiwech, thank you very much. We got a long road ahead of us. A lot of work. Next year, Lord willing, God willing, Creator willing, I hope to be back and hear a good report that we are truly taking care of our own, not a system that's heavily legislated. And speaking with other leaders from our territory, I think I'm echoing what they say, what I just said. Ishimigash, thank you very much.
We've asked the leadership from the CASs to sit up here so that they have a chance to hear your words. As someone noted, there's been a lot of really good words spoken, but the test of this is going to be the manifestation of those words in day-to-day practices with the CASs and that partnership, that collaboration with Indigenous communities.
Today, as we all heard, these were hard things to hear. They really were. As a person who has come through the 60s scoop, as a child, I hear these words. As one of many children, I heard those words, and it broke my heart. Really did. And I hope that it will always break my heart. We need our children. Wanting them is one thing. They need to take their place within our communities, because our communities have a whole different picture in them without our children in it. To believe you, but I come from a really hard place. I come from a really, really hard place. My world was taken from me when I was little. I was this tall, and my world was gone. My language was gone. My name was gone. I lost everything. And today I hear that there's going to be others who are going to come back into their communities, who are going to gain that loss. And I much look forward to that. And I do. So in a year from now, I would like to see a gathering come together so that we can say, yes, look what has happened in this province. Look at the honorable words that have been upheld. Oh, Miigwech, I wish to keep you in the honorable place that I see you today. Oh, Miigwech.
Amongst other groups, that's a misappropriation. That is a false portrayal of who we are as Inuit. And then that becomes what people in general will believe, which then stays inaccurate. So our Inuit come with our knowledge, and sharing the time with Linda and Heidi. I mean, we all know each other's family and where we all come from, who we're namesaked after. That's another Inuit tradition. We were able to share that, and we just lift ourselves up now by being together. But I would appeal to everyone here and in other groups, please, please take that time and fully understand Inuit culture. Don't be shy. Don't be shy to ask us. We are honored to be here, but we're also very proud to stand and still, I said it yesterday, our Inukness, eh? Keeping our Inukness. And our Inuit may be in the south and the north to go to that. We may survive in our numbers of people, but I will not go quietly watching our cultural aspect, our culture, our Inuit culture become extinct. So this is really an important turning point for everyone to understand and hear my appeal to please understand our Inuit.
I'm a survivor of many things.
I'm a true survivor is what I say.
I want you to be able to do your job better, not only for the Inuit, but for yourselves. I don't want another apology 30 years down the road. I want the apologies to stop. So the behaviors that are causing the apologies stop.
Reconciliation just doesn't mean saying you're sorry. There's so much more to it than that, and reconciliation is one of those things, or apologizing, saying you're sorry is not something that you can necessarily fake, because the evidence of your behavior subsequent to it will tell the story of whether the genuineness of that apology or not. So some of the questions that I would ask agencies to consider as they want to move forward post-apology is, to ask themselves in their heart of hearts, do they really believe we have the capacity to take care of our own children today? Do they really believe that? And if you do, how can you help us to build our capacity, our infrastructure to take care of our own children? Can you see beyond the dysfunction in our families to see the poverty and the impacts of residential school and the 60 scoop and the intergenerational trauma that continues to this day? Do you really see us as human beings, or are you secretly repelled by us? Only you can answer those questions in your heart of hearts. Do you really believe our ways are the better ways of taking care of children, of taking care of our children, our elders, our ceremonies, and our focus on prevention?
I think took it upon themselves to say it had to be done, and with or without the federal and provincial government being present today, it was something that just had to be done, and I think they went out of their way and made that apology. I believe it's the first step in a process that's probably going to go on for a year or so, or maybe even longer. I think from this point on, we'll start asking ourselves the important questions about, how should this unfold? I mean, if we were to accept this apology, is that something that the general public within the First Nations community is comfortable with? And if not, to what extent then do we go beyond this point, and how do we determine what that path will be and how it will unfold over the next year or so? I think we carry a lot as individual people. A lot of people have been very hurt by the processes that they have been in, and probably will carry that with them for the rest of their lives. A lot of people have taken measures to heal themselves and to try and work through those issues. I'm a product of the 60s scoop. I consider myself maybe one of the fortunate ones in that just educating myself to the many different paths that I could have taken, being adopted out or being shipped to some remote community or adopted to a different country, which wasn't uncommon. I got sent to residential school, and that led me on a very different path, defined the character I think I hold today. and I've struggled through all that. I don't talk much often about it. It's my demons that I keep with me, and things I struggle with every day, and I use that to educate my children. Those things that I've gone through. I think I'm content with what happened today. I think a lot of people, I reserve my position on the apology. I'm hoping and expecting, like I said, that this is a first step towards a longer process that will define what will happen next. And I'm hoping that the sincerity is there. I've worked with a lot of these people before, and I expect that they'll come good on their word. And the Grand Chief that spoke, said I expect to come back in a year, and I expect that there will be another meeting, and I'll expect that we'll be able to talk about the accomplishments that we've made over the course of the year towards addressing a lot of these issues in a larger kind of way. So I hope for that. I work towards that idea, and I'm committed, like many of our people that have gone through that process, to find the path.
The apology coming from another party, that being the 60s Scoop tool, that being the CAS of Ontario mainstream, that tool made an apology. That organization made apology for the work that they were contracted to do. And they see the errors, and they've seen the error in their ways, dating back decades. Our nations in Canada are strong. They're resilient, and they will heal. But Canada has an opportunity to aid and assist in that healing. This nation of Canada needs this time to heal. The nation needs to heal. Its people of Canada need to heal. And part of that healing comes from the acknowledgement that yes, this has happened in Canada. But now it's time to come together and recognize that we all have something in common. We have love and compassion, and we need to heal.
Well, hey, hi, oh, hi, oh, hey, oh, hi, hey, oh, way. Well, hey, hi, oh, hi, oh, hey, oh, hi, hey, oh, way. Well, hey, hi, hey, oh, hey. Well, hey, hi.